There we go. Good morning. Good morning. How is everybody? The sun is shining, the snow is melting. Spring is here. Oh, can't wait. My name is Jeff, as Jordan shared, and it is my pleasure to be here this morning to share the message, and I am excited to talk about family. That's the key point that we're going to focus on today. And if you're not familiar with my family, I have two brothers. Here is a very cute picture. I am the one on your left, if you can't tell us apart. And then my twin brother, Jason, is on the right. He's actually here in the audience. You'll have to pick him out later. And then our older brother, Chris, who's 6 years older than us, is in the middle there. And you can see here's another picture of us at our high school graduation. So young, full head of hair. Yes. Yeah. You can see the smiles. And here's another one. This is Chris getting deployed. He was in the Army Reserves, and I think this is him leaving for Qatar or Jordan, but you can see us there. And I found it interesting as I was getting these pictures. For some reason, we always lined up the same. You know, I think it was something our mom started so she could tell us apart, maybe. I don't know. But, this last picture, I share this because we're in college and who knows what we're up to. But we're so happy together. And I bring up my older brother because I was 8 years old when I learned that he had a different dad than I did. Until then, I had no idea. I just thought he was my brother who just looked different than everybody else in the family. Now, you may ask, how is this possible? Well, you see, in our family, his dad wasn't in the picture. His last name was the same as ours. He didn't have different family, grandparents. He didn't spend the weekends away from us. He was just my brother. We were a family. Now, I share this story because you may look at this picture and see right away, yes, something's different here. One of these is not like the other. But when I see it, I just see my brother. It never occurred to me that there was a difference between him and my other brother. Now, if we're talking family, in our society, we have all kinds of terms to define the exact relationship we have with one another. You could say I have a brother. You could say I have a half-brother. You could say I have a step-brother. We can define family as those we share a DNA with, a blood relationship. We can maybe even define it as a little bit a wider scope of what family is. Well, today I want to talk to you about our church family. And I want to talk about how Jesus redefines the family in regards to our church family. So it's my pleasure to carry on in the book of Mark as we've been going and talking about the followers of Jesus. And I want you to think about, as we look back on what's been shared and as we look ahead as we go through the book of Mark, a lot of Jesus' teachings were not about how to get into heaven, but more importantly, what to do while we're here on earth. So let's continue looking at the writings of Mark and that mindset. And we're going to be in chapter 3 today. At the end of chapter 3 in Mark, Jesus is speaking with a group. So verse 31 starts out, "Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, 'Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you.' 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my mother, my brother, my sister.'" From our perspective, as we look at this last verse, it may seem like a very simple statement. Really, it's just left at that. Jesus doesn't explain the statement any further. You see in other times with the parable, he'll talk to his disciples later and give a greater explanation. If we look at the book of Mark as we go into chapter 4, Jesus is off in another land talking to a different group. There's no more reference to this line. So to us, we may think, okay, it's just a cute idea. oh, okay, yeah, you're my brother, you're my sister. But really, it ends like this because it was essentially a moment where Jesus, he was really sharing a new way of thinking. It was such a huge monumental moment that nothing else needed to be said for the audience. Those that heard it were just, they were going to walk away thinking, what just happened? If we are called to be followers of Jesus, it's important to understand the parameters we're called under. So what does Jesus expect from us? Let's go back and revisit that passage. And let's start to unpack it a little bit more so we can understand what he's talking about. Now, if we were to look earlier in Mark, this is not the first time that Jesus' family has come to get him from a group as he was talking. But in this moment, Jesus ignores his family. Now, that would get the attention of those around him. They sent someone in, and a crowd was sitting around him, but he doesn't leave. Now, I'm guessing that there was at least one or two nervous people in the audience that were looking around kind of side-eyed like, Jesus, I know you're the Son of God, but your mom is here and she is mad. You better go. In fact, I am a child of the 80s, and I grew up when if your mom wanted you to come home, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have Apple Watches, we didn't have anything. What'd she do? She stood on the front porch and yelled your name. And if you didn't come home or you were out of range and you didn't hear her and she had to come get you, oh, Lord help you. You knew you were in trouble then. So this moment, just like it is for us, same for them. They understand that he's not responding to his family and he's choosing to stay there. That's huge. And then he shares the second half. He looked at those seated in a circle around him and he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Now, that sentence that he just looked at those seated around him and he shared that moment, I don't think it grabs the true moment. You know, Mark's being very brief. I think if he were to have a little bit more paper and more pen, he might have written it something like this. Here's my imagination, if I'm allowed to reversion the scripture. So, who are my brother and my brothers? He asked. Then Jesus slowly looked around the room at each person seated near him. His stare pierced their very souls, and they began to question their own existence. Silence hung in the air for an eternity until Jesus spoke again. Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. You see, something like this, that last statement would have been shocking for the audience to hear. Because in Israel, it was a nation obsessed with the biological family. They were devoted to studying genealogies, bloodlines, and the like. This is how they believed grace was granted, is through your heritage. You had to be Jewish by birthright. In fact, the book of Matthew, if we look at it, tracks the entire lineage of Jesus back to Abraham because it was so important to prove. This moment, Jesus is teaching his audience something different. He's saying that God's grace is transmitted via a person's acknowledgement of his lordship and allegiance to his community of faith. For us, this could be like, yeah, we know this. But to them, at that moment, at that time, God's grace is transmitted via a person's acknowledgement and allegiance to his creed. That's all it takes. It seems simple enough. In other words, you're not saved because you're Jewish blood, but because of Jesus' blood. That's why we take communion. That's why we remember that. To be clear, Jesus isn't trying to undo the Genesis model of family with a mom and a dad and a brother and a sister, sons, daughters. Make no mistake, Jesus loves the family. But in a way, he's trying to subvert the structure as our exclusive or even primary loyalty. What he's trying to do is show us that what binds us together in faith is intended to be so deep and so foreign to the world. What Jesus is saying here is that admission to his kingdom, to his family of God, is no longer determined by your blood relation. What he's really saying is that Jesus is telling us that we are all a part of his family. And that's huge. Because really, take a moment. Take a moment and think about your family. What that means. Take a moment and think about the family that you enjoy dinner together with, that you celebrate special occasions with, the family that you go on vacations with, the family that you spend quiet evenings with, the family that you spend very noisy mornings with, getting ready for school. These are the people you'll go outside your comfort zone to help, to support. You see, the people in that picture are probably limited to your immediate family. It's a special group for you. They're the ones you invite. They're the ones that you call first. They're the ones that you give the news to. You know, really think about it. When we talk about family, who's going to help you move? Who's going to drive you to the airport early in the morning? Or more importantly, who's going to remember you when you're gone? In this passage at the end of Mark, Jesus is telling us that we are all now a part of his family. We are that special group to him. We all share that special connection that is reserved for family. And as we discuss the idea of following Jesus, he has redefined who his followers are and how they should view each other. That's powerful. Because if I truly look at you, each and every person in this church and in the larger church, as my brother, as my sister, well, that changes everything. It changes how I treat you and you treat me. Now, if you've been around church for any length of time, you know that describing church as a family can almost become a buzzword that's thrown around. You've probably seen it in companies. We're a family here. You've seen it in other places. We're a family, and you're like, do they really mean it? Well, first, we got to set a baseline. What is a family? What are we talking about here? Now, if we look to the dictionary might define a family as this. A family is a group of two or more people related by birth, marriage, or adoption who live together. All such related persons are considered as members of one family. Okay, we can get behind that. That makes sense. But another definition I found, it spoke volumes. And I want to share that with you. Consider this. Family means having someone to love you unconditionally in spite of your own shortcomings. Family is loving and supporting one another even when it's not easy to do so. It's being the best person you can be so that you may inspire your loved ones. That goes well beyond stop picking on your sister. That goes well beyond, yes, you have to sit through another recital because she's your brother or he's your brother. We're doing our best for the other person. We look to the Bible and we look for context. Okay, is that really what they're talking about? Well, when we look to Galatians, Paul's talking about in chapter 6, therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. You see, Paul isn't just telling us, treat those in church as family. He's telling us to treat those in church as our close, immediate family. Because to be clear, as I share this with you, doing church as a family is not something that's a buzzword to us. It's not something we're saying because it's popular. It's something that it's a part of our DNA as a church. We truly believe it here. One of the key identity markers of New Point is that we do church as a family. Now, what you have to understand is that's not something we're going to simply drift into. It's something that we are intentional with. And that word intentional, we're going to come back to a couple times, and that's something I want you to hold on to because That's what it takes to have a healthy family. Intention. But before we get into that, let's go back. Let's go back in time for a little historical perspective on the early Christians. In the book Rise of Christianity, Rodney Stark, he notes that the growth of the early church is arguably the most remarkable sociological movement in history. In 40 AD, there's roughly about 1,000 Christians in the Roman Empire. By 350 AD, there were nearly 30 million Christians. 53% of the population had converted to the Christian faith. He writes in his book, Jesus was a miracle worker who spent nearly all of his brief ministry in the tiny and obscure province of Galilee, often preaching to outdoor gatherings. A few listeners took up his invitation to follow him, and a dozen or so became his devoted disciples. But when he was executed by the Romans, his followers probably numbered no more than several hundred. How is it possible that in 300 years we go from 1,000 Christians to 30 million Christians? Because it was just a small ministry in the middle of nowhere. The early church leaders, they didn't have the things we now consider essential for our faith. They didn't have an official church building. They didn't have vision statements, core values listed on a website. They didn't have social media. They didn't have radio. They didn't have TV. Gosh, I doubt they even had a teaching cohort to do some heavy lifting once in a while. I don't know how they did it. But really, they were growing. They didn't even have the New Testament yet. It was being written each time Paul sent a letter to a new church. You see, back then the followers of Jesus were often deeply misunderstood, persecuted, and some were even called to give their life for their faith. But despite that calling, even though they were called to certain death, they still loved, they served, they prayed, they blessed. And slowly over 300 years, they brought the Roman Empire to its knees. Now, how did they do this? Well, the early followers of Jesus, they brought the Roman Empire to its knees through deep love for each other and unprecedented love for the stranger. Lucian, a 2nd century enemy of Christianity, writes to the emperor, "It is incredible to see the warmth with which the people of this religion help one another. They lack nothing. Their first legislator, Jesus, has convinced them they are brothers." Now, I read that, and, we put it in a kind of probably monotone voice as we've read a lot of this stuff because we didn't really have the context for it. But, really think about this guy sharing this note with just some sass. It's incredible to see the warmth with which these people of this religion help one another. They lack nothing. Their first legislator has convinced them that they're brothers. That's the disbelief that he brings to this story. That's the attitude they have when they look at the early Christians trying to figure out, how are you growing? Why are people so attracted to you? Well, as we look to the New Testament and we look in the Bible, it's because of the commands of Jesus. We can see in 1 John 4:21. "And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister." Notice here that he's using the same words. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. Not like, not put up with, not deal with, but love. Just like he said in the past, anyone, you must love the church as you love your bride. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. Always saying you've got to share that same love for the others around you. If we go into another verse, James chapter 4, he says, "Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges him speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it." We start to learn here of how we're supposed to treat each other when we don't always agree, because that's going to happen. We're not always going to get along. We're going to have differences. How do we share that moment with each other? Well, we're not to judge. We're not to gossip. We're supposed to, again, remember they're our brother, they're our sister. So we look at John 13:34, a very famous verse. A new command I give you, love one another. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. With intention. Think about that. As someone new comes into this church, what are they going to see? What are they going to experience? Are they going to look around and say, wow, these people really treat each other like family? There is a lot of love in this room. Are they going to think, wow, that was awkward? That was weird. What kind of vibe are they going to get from New Point? And that's what we're talking about with this series is, are we really going to follow Jesus? Are we going to do what it takes? Are we going to do it with intention? We look in the book of Acts, and I know we've shared this before as we've talked about doing church together. Chapter 2, verse 42, it's a long one here. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Wouldn't it be nice if that's just where I ended? I mean, for time's sake, but also, if that was it, if we just shared a message and I stood up here and said, love your fellow Christian as your brother and sister, treat them like family, go. And everyone would get it, but you know what? It's not how life works, is it? You see, the problem is we like the idea of family, but we're not always great at the reality of it. We can call someone our brother and our sister, but do we really mean it? You see, the reality of the church as a family is when it becomes challenging. It's not easy to be in a spiritual family. And that's why we can often prefer the language over the practice of it. And I want to talk about the real situation that we all face is that we look at life through a lens. And what I mean by that is that everyone perceives and interprets the world based on their own unique perspective, experience, and beliefs, which act like a filter shaping how we see the world, how we see reality, similar to how a camera lens affects an image. Essentially, no two people see the exact same thing because their lens is different. So when I talk about family with you guys, it lands differently for each person. And that's something that we have to be aware of as an audience with each other, but it's something we have to be aware of with ourselves. Because when I say the word family, for some of us, we may be dealing with not the good stuff, but the bad stuff. We may be concerned about abandonment. We may be concerned about or thinking about unresolved issues. We may struggle with the idea of family because there's a lack of togetherness in our own family. We may remember addiction and emotional issues that have caused huge, huge moments of hurt in our family. And to say that you want to bring that into church, it's tough. See, my big question for you is, what is your perspective as you view the idea of family? Really stop and think about that. Take that away. What I want you to think about is, as we talk about doing church as a family, as I get up and stand here and tell you, like, oh, we need to do church as a family, and you can see it on our website and all that stuff, what is it you bring to the table when you think about that word family? Really, what is it? What do the terms brother or sister mean to you? And how does that impact how you look at others? You see, for my generation, the example of a perfect family came from TV shows. Who remembers TGIF on, I think it was NBC? Step by step, full house, family matters. You see that those families, they had loving and supporting parents. They had annoying yet caring siblings. Each person got their moment to talk. Everyone had a place in the family. And if we look at the framework of a typical sitcom and how outlined how a family unit was supposed to work, we walk away thinking, okay, well, we're presented with a problem. It kind of gets worse, maybe a little silly, but in the end, it always works out. We have a moment where we come together, and then guess what? Next week, we're never going to talk about it again. Key. You see, we've been trained by our culture to view our family unit, if we have one, as something that is self-contained and self-sufficient. Part of the challenge and need for the church is to make sure we are intentionally weaving in the wider family of God into our family life. Intentionally. It's going to take some work. You see, the family stereotype for most of us is you get married, you have a couple kids, maybe a dog. You pull up the drawbridge, and that's it. That's the basic units with which we do life. However, the Bible really paints for us a picture that our biological family and our spiritual family need each other. Now, this is much harder for churches in the West. Instinctively, we are individualistic. What do I mean? Well, we're consumers. In reality, if we can't get out of church what we think we should, we just go somewhere else. It's unfortunate, but we live in a large town, in a large city where we can go from church to church. We think about what does this church give me versus coming through the doors thinking, am I here to give to someone else? Am I here to serve, to be a blessing to someone else? It's a whole different mindset. And you see, the reason why maybe that mindset exists today is because if we look back in time at a family farm, 1800s, well, in order to survive, they needed each other. Everybody pitched in. Your life revolved around everyone else's life. Now, as we progress towards the Industrial Revolution, we start to segregate the roles. Okay, now the parents work out of the house and the kids go to school out of the house. They come together at night to eat in front of each other. Well, now, today, the idea of family can have maybe a distorted view for many of us. We can focus on things like safety, consumption, and individual happiness. In other words, we can get what we want, or if we can get what we want, have nothing go wrong, and everyone does what he or she wants to do, then the family has done its job. And I will admit, it is tough to stand up here and pretend like I'm an expert in having the best family in the world. There are days when my kids come to church with matching socks, I call that a win. And so for each of us, we need to think about what it means to be a happy family, a successful family, and how we see that. Because too many people have a dysfunctional view. Too many people have a dysfunctional relationship with family, and so unless we define it clearly, we can all assume something different about what we are trying to build in this house. Not only does Jesus redefine family, but he creates a new one. A family of God, a family of disciples who follow him with their whole lives. It's a family that welcomes widows and orphans, slaves and freemen, Jews and Gentiles. The church, therefore, isn't just a bunch of families that simply meet together on a Sunday, but the church is a family. The early church got it, and sure, some still married and had children, but others chose not to, out of devotion. The unmarried, the widowed, the abandoned, all of these were welcome. They're welcome as full family members. You see, church, we are rooted as a family and planted together as adopted sons and daughters with a covenant devotion and love towards our brothers and our sisters. Now, that covenant devotion is key there, because we use that when we talk about like communion, that covenant bond. And what it means is we have an agreement between two people that can't be broken. So that's what we want to create, a covenant devotion, because God knew that we needed one another. He created Adam, but he knew he couldn't be alone, so he created Eve. Then he thought they were having too much fun, so he gave them kids. But then he saw them with kids and thought, you need help, so he gave them neighbors. He added to the world because he knew we needed each other. We could not do it alone. We were not meant to do it alone. You see, we live in a time in history where there is an epidemic of loneliness and narcissism. We don't have the training or the commitments because the world we live in to actually commit like we want to. In order for the church to be the thing that God called it to be, it's got to be based on deep devotion, and it's got to be based on intentional, deep love. You see, if you're actually willing to devote and commit yourself, the door then opens for the supernatural. It releases unprecedented generosity, and it becomes an environment that attracts the lost. This isn't just some New Testament ideal. This is what we are called to build. Think about that word attract. I'm sure everybody growing up had that family in their neighborhood that everybody loved. All the kids gathered at the house. Maybe that was your house. Maybe that was someone else's. But everybody wanted to hang out there. Why is it? What did they do? What about that house was so special? It was probably because the others saw the love, the togetherness. They felt like, wow, I fit in here. Or I at least can see how they love each other and they're committed to each other. So what does that look like for New Point to become a family? Well, it means we begin to see our spiritual family as a family. It's how the New Testament describes us, and it's not an honorary title. It's not a buzzword, but it is a real idea. It means that we're hospitable. It means we open up our normal, everyday life to other people. We're going to go beyond the highs, the hellos. How are you doing? We're going to open our lives. We're going to share a meal together. We're going to go out into this world and share an activity together. You see, no one should be lonely in the church. There are different temperaments, different personalities. It's okay to be alone. That's how some of us recharge our batteries. But it's not okay to be lonely. We should give our time to each other. We should be radically generous. Think back to our early series this year. A radical generosity. We're going to do that until no one is in need. That the lost are drawn to our church, to our family. You know, I think about my daughter in elementary, her school, in the playground, they have what's called a friendship bench. What does that mean? Well, if there's a kid that doesn't have a friend to play with, they sit on the bench. And it tells the other kids that this person needs a friend. And they know to go over and invite them, bring them into their group. How powerful is that? Now, we don't necessarily have a bench like that here, but we do have prayer teams that will be up front here. Jordan's office has a couch. Emily's office has a couch. There are places you can sit and talk and share. No one should be lonely. If you are coming away from this message, and I mean no guilt on any of it. I don't mean to pressure you. I don't mean you to walk home or to go home and walk away thinking, wow, that was heavy. What I want you to think is, how am I viewing this idea of family? What am I bringing to the church when I show up? Do I need to deal with some stuff? Do I need to heal an old wound before I can open a new door? Do I need to make amends with someone in my past before I can meet a new friend in the future? Those are key things. As I was preparing for this sermon, a quote from a very famous movie came to mind. Lilo and Stitch. And some of you, I'm sure, immediately know what I'm going to say. It's Ohana. Ohana means family, and family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. Now, you might be thinking of the little girl saying that, but go back to Mark. Jesus sitting in a crowded room, and he says, "You are my family." What he's saying is Ohana. He's saying that you will not be forgotten. You will not be left behind. We will join him one day in heaven, but until then, we must intentionally treat each other as family. Now, in my line of business, I do a lot of corporate training, and I always tell my audience, at any point you should be able to stop and say, what's in it for me? What am I supposed to get out of this? So what? Well, here's my so what answer to you. It comes from Romans, and it's in the Message version. We read this: "This resurrection life you receive from God is not a timid, grave, tending life. It's adventurously expectant, greeting God with a childlike, 'What's next, Papa?' God's Spirit touches our spirits and confirms who we really are. You see, we know who He is and we know who we are, father and children. And we know we are going to get what's coming to us, an unbelievable inheritance. We go through exactly what Christ goes through. So here's key. If we go through the hard times with Him, then we're certainly going to go through the good times with Him. That's what I want you to think about when it comes to family. As a church family, we're going to have good days. And we're also going to have bad days. We're going to have ups, we're going to have downs. But it's what we should expect. We will celebrate together. We will mourn together. And we will get through this day and the next together. You know, they say, family, you don't get to choose who's in your family. And in a way, the same could be said for your church family. As the folks that walk through this door, we don't get to choose necessarily who's in our church family. But when they do, and they want to become a part of our church family, we're going to accept them. Because we believe it. Our goal at New Point is to build a family together. How? We have life groups. If you're not in a life group, please connect with Jordan or Emily and see how you can get into a life group. They're powerful, powerful opportunities to get into a small group and do life together. Get involved in our kids' ministry. I can personally tell you it has changed my life to be part of the kids' ministry. And I can also tell you that each kid that comes through those classroom doors, I treat like my own. I want them to walk away knowing Jesus just like I want my own kids to walk away. And our 5th Sunday celebrations, we've got one coming up at the end of March. We get to hear testimonies, we get to see baptisms. These have become some of our favorite Sundays for folks around here. Because while we can hear a great message and how we can learn about the Word of God, seeing it come to life in those around us, supporting those. Every time there's a baptism, I think to myself, welcome to the family. You are now a part of God's bigger kingdom. So, as we close, Emily gave a challenge to you in her sermon, so I give a challenge to you today. Go have a meal with someone else. Simply find another family in this church and connect with them. Share a meal together. Open your life to someone else. Not just in your life group, that doesn't count. Yes, our life group's getting together tonight. I'm not going to count that. Find another family, someone that you maybe haven't connected with, gotten to know better, have a meal. Open your heart, open your life, get to know the folks around you. Truly embrace and be intentional about the love we share for each other, because that's what we're called to do. That's what Jesus meant when he said, you are my brother, my sister, or my mother. If you'll stand with me, I just want to close with this thought and this prayer. Tim's going to finish with the song. But I just ask you to bow your heads and take a moment. And our prayer team will come down, and they're here for you if you need prayer. But in this moment, think about the lives that have impacted you, the family members. Think about the lives that you impact, that you have the ability to shape. And what I want you to do is to ask God, is there an opportunity there to make stronger bonds? But to widen that circle. How can I invite more people into that? How can I feel safe and secure, knowing that it does open us up? There are opportunities where we could get hurt, we could be let down. We may not get back the same thing that we give out, but we know. We know that God's love will heal these wounds. We know that God's love is what we need to share. So I pray, dear Lord, thank you for this opportunity for us to come together as a church family. Thank you for this chance to hear your word, to worship, to pray, to celebrate with those in our church family. Lord, I just ask as we go through this day that we may seek opportunities, we may see the people around us that need to hear your word, that need to be a part of your family. May we invite them in. We just ask you, dear Lord, that you will bless those. Bless those that are hurting, that are lost, that are wondering, is it real? Is it true? May we live a life that proves that and says yes. We just ask, dear Lord, that you will be with us. Give us grace, forgiveness, as we give grace and forgiveness to those that we encounter. We are so lucky. Let us not forget each day that we are a part of your family. Amen. It has been a real blessing to be here today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love getting up in front and sharing a message, and I thank you guys for the opportunity. So please enjoy this song, and we'll see you next Sunday.